Well, hello, friends, and welcome to the From Busy to Rich podcast, where we help financial advisors grow their businesses beyond the products they sell and the assets they manage to increase profitability and reclaim their time by providing strategies and insights that will not only change your life, but practice. This week, we have a very special episode where we take you to a live recording at an event Wes had the opportunity to be a guest speaker. We hope you enjoy.
Well, happy Sunday, everybody. It is great to see you all. Hey, as I tee up what we're going to talk about today, I do need to give you a little bit of a disclaimer because the content we're going to be going through, just the nature of the topic and all the different backgrounds we have watching, it's almost impossible that I cover this without some of you, maybe many of you actually, leaving offended. And listen, if that's you, I don't want you to suffer in silence. I want to hear from you. So I'm going to put my personal contact information up here on the screen. My name is Buck Giebelhaus. I am the senior pastor here at North Point. I want to hear from you. In fact, call me. The later, the better, actually, at night. And maybe even have some drinks first so you really get your thoughts around what you want to say, if you could. For those of you who may be new to North Point, I'm not Buck Giebelhaus. My name is Wes Young, and I'm actually a volunteer. I'm not on staff with the church. I actually think you're going to like today's message. I don't think you're going to walk away offended. But if you are, that really was Buck's contact information. So feel free to reach out to him. We've been in a series here called Keep the Change. And Buck and Jordan did a great job opening this thing up. And really what we've been talking about is what does it mean to live a rich life, specifically as it relates to the role money plays in all of our lives. Because all of us know, I mean, money's not the most important thing, but it's pretty important. And here's how I know it's not the most important thing. And I'd love you to play along with me if you could. How many of you, if you had the option, you would like to switch bank accounts with Warren Buffett? Right? Do we have any takers in the audience? I mean, it's not a trick question, I promise. And now, how many of you would switch bank accounts with Warren Buffett if you had to trade ages with Warren Buffett? Because Warren's like 96, right? I still see some hands went up. He's like, I'd be a good year. You know, maybe a 2, whatever, I'm in. And the deal is, like, money's not the most important thing, but listen, it really does play a big role in all of our lives. So it's so critically important that we unpack this from time to time to really think about how do we leverage money in such a way that it actually gets us closer to the life we were designed to live. And so to do that, I'm going to take you a few places. I want you to think back with me to your very first job. Okay, not like this is one you got a paycheck for and taxes came out and all those kinds of things. So mine was at one of these, a Blockbuster video. You guys remember those? Yeah. I was 15 years old. I made $4.25 an hour. That was the minimum wage at the time. And my job, extraordinarily difficult and important, was to put the tapes back on the shelf. Tapes were these things that we used to watch movies on. So I put the tapes on the shelves, and I remember having this thought my first year of work. I thought, when I'm making another $1 an hour, I'm going to be rich. I did. I thought, I'm going to have all this extra money. I would look at people that were a couple income levels above me, and I'd think, how do you have financial problems? You should be throwing a party. You make so much more money than I do. And the reason I thought that is probably not all that different from why you might have thought that. It's because I had a gap between where I was and where I wanted to be. And at 15 years old, another $1 an hour would get everything on my list. Funny thing happened. Years later, I was making a lot more money. And do you think my gap went away? No. In fact, I think it got bigger and more complicated. And it's so, and where I want to go with what we're going to talk about today is kind of tease out this idea of the gap, because I think it's so relevant to what we talk about as it relates to money. So all of us have a gap. And here's the thing, here's the truth. The gap between where we are and where we want to be never goes away. It just moves. Okay, and I want you to think about it. This is not a bad thing. It's actually I think one of the most beautiful things about people is the gap between where we are and where we want to be. The fact that we have it, no matter how much success you have and how far down the road you get, what you accomplish, it doesn't actually go away. It just moves, is a really beautiful thing, because all of us want our lives to be better. We want our lives to be better tomorrow than they are today, better today than they were yesterday. And so better is simply a version of that gap. And so no matter how good stuff is, we would still love to turn it up a notch. Now, it's also where faith lives. Faith is a substance of things we hope for, the evidence of things we've not yet seen. It's what anticipation lives. If I was to sit with you and we were to talk, and I was to ask you about all the big areas of your life, and if you were to envision a beautiful life 3 years from today, in all the big areas of life that you care about, your financial life, your professional life, the relationships that you have, the physical health that you're in, the spiritual life, and you were to begin to really put that on paper and dream about it, you'd get excited. Because all of us, we get excited when we start thinking about a bigger future than our current today. It's also having this gap is what gives us the energy we need to do hard things today. Because it's the energy when we have a bigger vision of a future that's possible, we can give ourselves the energy we need to not trade what we want ultimately for what we can have immediately. And as a result, achieve some of the greatest things in life. Now, it is tricky because people often ask me when I talk about this specific topic, well, Wes, I thought we were supposed to be content with what we've got, content with where we are. And let me just talk about that for a second because it's partially true, but contentment has nothing to do with the absence of ambition. In fact, if you don't have a bigger future than your current today in your mind, you can't be happy with where you are because it does take two things. Now, the extreme to this too is you can be wired kind of like me. And if I'm not careful, I can get so focused on the future that I want and where I'm going. I'm not really taking the time to be grateful and enjoy where I am on my way to where I'm going as I navigate that gap. So you need two things. You need both a big ambition and you need a grateful condition in order to do life well, to dance with the gap between where we are and where we want to be and be happy about the process. I love this word happiness because we can disagree on a lot of things. And we've got a bunch of people that belong to North Point and are watching online today. And you can disagree on a lot of things, but here's one thing I don't think anybody in the room would disagree with, or any of you watching online, is we'd all like to be happier, right? We'd like to be happier. No matter if you're super happy all the time, happier still sounds better. And there's a behavioral psychologist, his name is Arthur Brooks. And Arthur has written several best-selling books, wrote one with Oprah, has done a bunch of stuff in the business community that's really good. And he teaches a class at Harvard that has a 3-year waiting list on the art and science of happiness. And Arthur breaks down what happiness is into what he calls the 3 micronutrients of happiness. And they're enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. And I think this plays so well to the discussion of the gap. So if you think about enjoyment is about pleasure combined with people, combined with memories. So if you were to do an exercise, and I actually recommend you do this, when you're trying to get into a grateful condition and have a big ambition, the grateful condition part, if you were to go back and you were to look at the last 10 years of your life, so a decade in the past, and you were to write out your greatest moments list, you know, all the things you accomplished, maybe experiences that you had, maybe it was a job, something happened great there, or something personally in a relationship, all these events you were on, vacations you took, and maybe even pull out your phone when you go to do it and look at your pictures because it'll stimulate some thinking around you. I guarantee you this. One of the common denominators is enjoyment will come out of because it will involve memories that involve people that involve pleasure. Now, it's not always it was pleasurable during the time, but it was pleasurable after the outcome was through because you had to suffer through or struggle through hard things. On the other side of the gap is where we get the meaning. Okay, so enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. Meaning has everything to do with faith, family, friends, and work that matters to others. So when you're creating your big ambition, faith, again, is a substance of things we're all hoping for, the evidence of things we've not yet seen. And when it's about, it has a bigger impact than somebody other than just you. Because, you know, we can all have a vision for our future that's very self-centered and we can probably achieve it. I don't know if you guys ever have seen the show Succession on Netflix. Those people had a big vision of where they wanted to go, but it was all about them. And they weren't very happy people. So having a big vision is one of those other micronutrients of happiness that involves other people. And then the funniest one, I think, is this idea that lives in the middle as we dance with the resistance between where we are and where we want to be is satisfaction. Because here's the deal. You can't have satisfaction without overcoming hard things. And when you can choose not to trade what you want ultimately for what you can have immediately, some of the most satisfying moments in your life came as a result of having to struggle. Maybe even having to suffer, maybe even having to go through a little pain to get to that outcome that you want. You know, it's kind of like you go to the gym in the morning. Like some of you are strange and you actually like the workout process. I am not like you. Okay. I like the workout process when it's over, right? So but it's satisfying when it's over, but I had to suffer, had to struggle. Well, life is a lot like that. So we need these things. And I think on this topic, as we transition into where I want to go with the rest of our time today, there is a great quote that I think beautifully outlines this gap between where we are and where we want to be. It's by a guy named Stephen Pressfield, and Stephen wrote the book, The War of Art. Great book if you haven't had the opportunity to read it. But he says this, he says, most of us have two lives, the life we live and the unlived life within us. Between these two stands resistance. And isn't that true? Because if we were to have lunch together today and I was to ask you about where you're at right now, and I was to ask you about the things that you're looking forward to in the future possibilities, whether you're a student and you're looking forward to this next year, wherever that year might be, maybe you're graduating and you're looking forward to what college might be, or you're in college and you're looking forward to that next season. Maybe it's an internship through the summer, or you've been out of college a while and you're just continuing to maybe grow a family, or now you've got a family. Your biggest vision is you're looking forward to being out of diapers. You know, whatever that might be, all of us have a life we're living, and we have an unlived life within us. And between those two stands resistance. And it is how we dance with the resistance that'll determine the direction and the quality of our life. And so what I want to do is kind of tell you about like this idea of the gap, because we have this gap between where we are and where we want to be that we're navigating. There's a fundamental truth that kind of ties into something that I think is funny about this series, is all of us are going to run out of time and money before we run out of all the ideas and opportunities that we could go pursue. It's just true. There is more things that you could go do than you have time and money to go after every opportunity that exists as you're navigating your gap already between where you are and where you want to be. And you know this. Now, that's why a series like this can be both inspiring and really, really frustrating, right? Inspiring because if you've been hanging around for the last couple of weeks, you heard Buck and Jordan talk about some things that were very just practical that you could see. They talked about, hey, saving first and having a spending plan on the rest. It makes a lot of practical sense, doesn't it? You could see where if you were to do that, you had margin in your life where you weren't just consuming everything you created, where as you encountered opportunities or bumps in the road, it wouldn't feel like catastrophic disaster. And you could prepare for a future, and it would actually help accelerate your ability to navigate your gap from where you are to where you'd like to end up. So some things are super practical and inspiring. And then some things are super frustrating. Like giving money away before you save and before you spend, because that's what they talked about every week, didn't they? That one, let me just tell you, I'm in the financial strategy business. I do this for a living. And if your gap envisions you having more money at the end of today than you started with, if you give money away today, you will have less of it at the end of the day than you started. That's free financial advice, okay? So I gave all that to you. I know you want to take some notes. If you're not taking notes on that one, you will. It makes no sense. In fact, listen, you guys know this. I mean, they're not in the room here, so don't tell them I said this, but they just want your money. Those preachers just want your money, right? I'm a volunteer. I'm like you. So they just want your money. And isn't that why everybody gets into the ministry? Because it's known as being so financially lucrative, right? Because they just want your money. How silly is that, right? And so in light of that, sometimes giving first feels like it's one of those things that's actually an obstacle, an unnecessary point of resistance to getting you from where you are to where you want to be, because you don't have enough money and time to get there with what you've got already as fast as you would like to. And so that's why, in light of all of that as a backdrop, I want to tell you a couple stories that I think by the time we're done, my hope for you, my prayer for you, is that you'll view giving before you save and before you spend as not an obstacle, but an accelerant to ultimately unlocking the true unlived life within you that you were meant to live and that you're going to be the happiest about living. And so I'm going to tell you a couple stories, as I said. First story I want to tell you is Peter's story. So if you've been reading the Bible a long time, you know who Peter is. If you haven't, let me just tell you, Peter was like a rock star in the world of Christianity. Peter followed Jesus his 3 years of his ministry before he was put to death and then resurrected. And Peter went on to to go on and spread the gospel throughout, really through ripple effect throughout the world based on the work that he would do. Peter was so famous in that he did so much good in his life. He ended up being buried in St. Peter's Basilica. You can go visit it in Rome. You just saw the Pope there, the new elected Pope there just the other day. So Peter was like a rock star. But the day of Peter's life we're going to come into was when this was not anywhere on Peter's radar screen. Like Peter had, this wasn't even existent in his head that this would happen. But Peter did have a big vision. And in fact, if you read about Peter, Peter is what I would call an Enneagram 7. And if you're not familiar with an Enneagram, that's just an ancient personality profiling system. But a 7 is what we call an enthusiastic visionary. And if you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you hear about Peter. Peter was always like, here, you know what we should do next? I mean, he was always like amping it up. And I identify with that because I'm like Peter. I'm an enthusiastic visionary. I'm an Enneagram 7. So if you're taking a vacation and you just want some new ideas, you call me because I've got some good ones. You're like, we're going to Napa Valley. I'm like, you should stop in Vegas on the way because it's halfway in between. It's going to be great. And go to a fight while you're there. You know, it's all kinds of stuff. So Peter was that, but Peter had this vision because in this time he was probably a third, fourth, maybe fifth generation fisherman. They had a fishing business that had been around for a long time. And somewhat on a small scale. So I had to think, just looking at all the life of Peter, that his vision between where he was and where he wanted to be, the unlived life within him, was that he thought, man, we could take this thing to another level. If we catch the right amount of fish, we'll be able to buy another boat. We'll be able to get more crews out there. We could be known as the greatest fishing empire that's ever existed in our little area of the world. This fishing enterprise is going to be great. So Peter was kind of in that mindset as we enter Peter's story here. Now we're so fortunate because Luke is the one who documented all this. Luke was a physician, so very analytical, very thoughtful, and he created an orderly account of the life of Jesus. And so I often think about, like, where did he get the time? Because he wrote a lot of the New Testament. And so I did some research on it, and I actually figured it out, because remember, he's a physician. So Luke wrote most of the writings he wrote while he had a waiting room full of people that he hadn't seen yet. And he was supposed to see him, right? So like most doctors, you sit in the waiting room, you just hang out a while. They're like, we'll be with him in a second. I'm writing the New Testament. I'll be back with you, So that's what he did. I don't really know if that's what he did it, but I kind of think it was. So I'm going to read this section and I'm going to go through it pretty rapid fire, but then I want to go back and tease it out. Because you remember that the New Testament, you can read the whole thing in like 3.5 hours, but this is like a chronicle of like 3.5 years of time, a lot of it. So there's details that if I don't take you back and kind of sit in them a little bit, you'll miss out on some of the things that are going on in this exchange. So with that, here we go. We're going to dive in. One day, as Jesus was standing by the Sea of Galilee, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. Jesus got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon. That's also Simon Peter. Back then, it was like street names in Austin. Everybody had 2 names, right? And he asked him to put out a little bit from the shore. So I want you to think about what's going on here, because if we're not careful, we miss this. So Peter, Jesus had been speaking, and just every time Jesus spoke, he gathered a crowd. And so the problem was some people in the back couldn't hear. We didn't have technology like we do today. So he had this idea of, if I get in one of the boats and I had the fishermen push out, the water acted like kind of a natural amphitheater, so it could push out to them what voices carry there. And Peter, this didn't seem like a big request, right? If you're going, well, of course, it's Jesus, right? Even if I didn't believe Jesus was the Son of God, I'd let him use the boat. I'd push out a little bit for him. But I need you to think about where Peter was. Because, listen, this is in the morning time, because back then, fishermen would fish at night. And the reason they do that is because the air was cooler, so the water was cooler, and it would bring the fish up to the top. So you stood a greater opportunity of actually catching more fish. And so they had fished all night. So imagine if you worked all day. And we're going to find out in a minute that it was not a successful day at work. Like, they caught no fish. And they had worked all night, and then they had their boats pulled up to the shore. You know why they did that? Because they would take the nets out, these massive, wet, dirty nets, and they would go hang them up in these contraptions that they'd made, and they would clean them. So they'd pull out all the sunglasses and solo cups out of the middle. I don't know what they pulled out, but whatever their version of that was back then. And they'd wash them, and then they'd let them dry, so they could roll them back up. And Peter's vision at this point had gone from this fishing empire vision to what every single one of ours does every time we encounter difficulty or setbacks. It got about this big. Peter's vision at that moment in that day was really ready for those nets to dry, because as soon as they're dry, I'm going to go home. I'm going to hope I don't see my dad on the way, because he's going to ask me how it went. And I'm going to get something to eat. And I'm going to go to sleep. And then hopefully I have enough energy in the morning to go out, or that next night to do this again, and I'll be back at it again. But right now, as his big vision was about this big, he just wanted to get something to eat and go to sleep. And Jesus interrupts that. He's like, hey, and what I love about this, it says Jesus got into one of the boats, and then he asked him. Can you imagine that if you owned a boat and some guy's just hopping in? He's like, hey, you want to push out a little bit for me? You know, it's like he jumps in the boat, but he kind of knew Peter. He had healed his mother-in-law, so maybe Peter kind of felt like he owed him a favor already. And he did like Jesus. He liked the words of Jesus. So he's like, this is not that big of a deal. It does delay my plan, and I am really, really tired and don't like actually doing anything right now that I'm asked. In fact, how many of you have worked all day and come home and the spouse that you agreed that you're going to love forever asked you to do something and like change the air filters, right? Jamie's here. Jamie, you hear that? And I'm tired. I've worked all day, right? It's like, God, do I have to change the air filters? Or this one has almost ended more marriages than anything else. What do you want to eat tonight? Right? Everybody know that one? It's like, we're getting divorced. That's what's happening. So, when you're tired at the end of the day, but Peter pushes past that. And he says, all right, we'll do it. So he pushes out. Now, here's the thing. Peter had no idea what hung in the balance of that day. He had no idea that he would be buried here at St. Peter's Basilica. Because for most of us, and I tell you, this is true of every single one of us in this room right now, at our best unlived life that we have within us, that we can envision in our heads, is so much smaller than what God has for each and every one of us. I love this quote by C.S. Lewis. He says, we're half-hearted creatures, fooling around with drink and sex and ambition, when infinite joy is offered to us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slum because he cannot imagine what's meant by an offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. So Peter had no idea what hung in the balance of that day, and it goes on here. It says, then Jesus sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he'd finished speaking, he said to Simon. Now, I love this because you know it, but before he said to Simon, as Peter is listening to him he's thinking, finally, we're almost done. I'm going to go back, go to sleep, get something to eat. It's going to be great. And Jesus ends, and I think Jesus turns around and smiles. I don't know. It doesn't give us that detail, but he says, hey, put out in the deep water. Means far from here. Not the shallow water, the deep water, and let down the nets for a catch. And he goes on to say, Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and hadn't caught anything. So it's at this moment that I got to be imagining Peter's like, this is clearly a rabbi carpenter, not a fisherman, right? He does not understand. Jesus, listen, Master, I don't know if you know this. We fished all night. We fished when you're supposed to fish because we're professional fishermen, rabbi carpenter. And so, but thank good message today too. I appreciate that. And he's, we fish when you're supposed to fish and we didn't catch anything. And I don't know if you noticed this, Jesus, but our nets, they're almost dry. And what we do after that, we roll those suckers up, store them, and we're going to eat and go to sleep. Hopefully come and catch more today. And by the way, Jesus, I don't know if you noticed this, but you've gathered quite the crowd. If I go do this, they're going to think I have lost my mind. I know 4 or 5 of them know my dad. They're going to go tell him. He's going to tell me I'm no longer like a great succession choice for the family business. This is going to be this is so embarrassing. And then what happens? Maybe it was the look in Jesus' eyes. Maybe it was something that he said. Maybe it was some other thing that he said that Peter done and it worked out really well. We don't really know. Maybe he healed because he healed his mother-in-law. But Peter says what would become basically the most important words Peter would ever say that day. He says this. He says, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. And then it goes on to say this. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boats to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man." For he and his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed Jesus. And the rest is literally history. When Peter's faith intersected with God's faithfulness, everything in his life changed, and he would go on to have an unlived life within him that he could have never dreamed of that particular day, because we are all far too easily pleased. Our best version of our biggest life for ourselves is not the best version that exists out there. And where we have to, I believe, where we kind of go with the rest of this message, I want to tell you another story, because this for Peter was a because you say so moment. And I've had because you say so moments. Many of you who I know, you've had a lot of these over the time. And I'd love to tell you a couple stories about Jamie and I in some of our because you say so moments. So years ago, I met Jamie in 2021, who's my wife still to this day. And, we got married and bought a house in 2001. She's correcting me from over here. Good job. Yeah. You just want to come on up? You want to, sit on here? Everybody would like to see you. So 2001, we got married. 2001 we met. 2002 we got married and bought a house. And we both had pretty good jobs. I was in an electrical contracting business. Jamie was a property manager. We both, at that time in 2003, decided we were making pretty good money, that I was going to leave this very stable job that I was good at, that I had a really stable income, great network in, expertise in, and I was going to go into the financial strategy business, which, as many well-meaning friends and relatives told me, that doesn't make any sense. You should not do that. You need to rethink what you're doing. This is bad stewardship. And I understand why they said that. But here's what had happened is Jamie and I had experienced some because you say so moments, because when we were dating, before we were ever married, I lived over there off Wells Branch Parkway. You guys know where that is, any of you? And right around the corner from Wells Branch is Shoreline Church, really big church out there. And it was right around the corner. So we started going. And Pastor Rob made the words of Jesus come alive in our lives. It was so practical. Like, these were truths that we began to apply them, and it was making our life better. And it was making us better at life. And one of those truths that didn't quite make as much sense as the others, because it seemed like I'd put me further back, not closer to, was to tithe. So we began tithing. We began giving 10% of our income to Shoreline. And tell you, over time, really didn't miss it. In fact, what ends up happening is you really begin to read the words of God with a different lens. Because it's kind of like the old saying, put your money where your mouth is. You have a different heart where your treasure is, there your heart is also. Your heart for reading what Jesus said and applying it, it turns it up a notch. It's kind of like if you've ever placed a bet on a football game or a UFC fight or something like that. Anybody ever done that? Remember? You liars. The pastors aren't even here. It's just me. So listen, you can be true. Plus, I just want to see who I want to hang out with later or not. But all of a sudden, I placed a bet on a UFC fight once, and I was super interested in he was born in Czechoslovakia and he came from here and he trains like this. All of a sudden, you're just new eyes while you're reading with new eyes. And I began to discover what I really believed with new eyes was a way to unlock human potential if you did a unique kind of financial strategy approach. And I was so passionate about it, and Jamie was on board with it. So we went ahead and made that switch. So fast forward now to and listen, guys, and that was March of 2003. It was hard, y'all. I mean, it was not like an instant success. In fact, I was at that time 24 years old. And even no matter how good ideas you have, I talk to people about it and they're like, "Wes, that sounds great. How many people have you done this from?" And I was like, "Well, none, but you could be the first, And it's kind of like being your surgeon's first surgery, nobody wants that really. But I was undeterred and we kind of grinded it out. I would say Jamie still had her job and I worked. So by 2004, we had made about the same amount of money that I'd made the year before in that role. And we just had Gage, our son. And we were planning on having another child a couple years later because Jamie can't keep her hands off me. You know what I'm saying? And so we were working on that. And so this idea of like what we were going to do is we had this another crazy idea of, hey, what if you didn't go back to the property management company and instead you kind of helped me with some of the back end stuff on our business, but really we're there to kind of bring the kids along and not go back to that role. And it was because you say so moment, because Jamie was making about half the income we were pulling in. So it was a major economic decision, but we really believed it was one of those things we should do. So we did it. And then would you believe this? Tell me how inconsiderate this is. Then Shoreline, like a week after we started this, they say, we're doing a building campaign. You believe that? You know what they do? They do sneaky stuff. They'd show pictures of the foundation being poured up there, right? Who would do that? You guys believe that? Tell you stories about the life change. I mean, how sneaky. Didn't they know I had a gap between where I was and where I wanted to be? I was tithing still, and they wanted more. I mean, and as time went on, and Jamie and I prayed about it, we decided we were going to begin to give and over and above our tithe, even in the middle of all this uncertainty. And the reason Jesus frequently said to his disciples, don't be afraid, is because he put them in lots of positions where they were afraid. And I was afraid. Like, what if this doesn't work? And there is no like magic here that this was going to work. I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but I believed it was way better to find out than to miss out. And so that's what we did. We began to give. And the amount we gave was like, the amount's not important because depending on your net worth, it's like, oh, that's nothing, or it's like that I could never give that much. But it was way more than we possibly thought we had because Jamie's job wasn't going to be bringing in any income anymore, and mine was all over the map. And so it was like, oh my gosh, well, let's dive in. And so we began to give. And the day after we wrote the first check, I went out and bought a lottery ticket, and I won $10 million. That didn't happen. I'm just kidding. It'd be cool though, right? Like, and I really did go buy a lottery ticket. I was like, we got to give God all avenues of work. So I had a rabbit's foot and a, clover, 4-leaf clover. I'm like, whatever it takes, but no, because it rarely works that way, right? This isn't magic. You're not going to formalize God. It was because we said so moment. We felt like we should do it. And we started doing it, and it got worse. It was really, really tough. I had a business line of credit to kind of smooth out the ups and downs of the income we were getting, so sporadic. And as we did this, the line of credit kept going up. But also as we did this, I was in a small group that I still have no idea how I got in this small group, by the way, because it was me. I was 25 at this time, and all the other guys were like 60-year-old men. Right? And but they were great. These guys were Jesus followers. They were men that had been through wars of business and ups and downs. So encouraging to me, so helpful. I'd tell them my story. They're like, Wes, just keep going. So it was wonderful. And one of the guys in the group, he had joined a little bit late. I always called him grouchy, like to his face. I would tell him grouchy because he was kind of grouchy, but he was also full of wisdom. And he asked me one day, hey, Wes, can you stay over a few minutes? I want to talk to you. I said, sure. And this is like 9 months into this, our pledging and giving. And, he said, and at this point, just the things people say to you, by the way, are just so weighty sometimes because I'm just looking for God, please give me, was it because you said so? Or was it because I thought so? Is this because you said so? And I'm just looking for any kind of sign that I'm doing the right thing. And so this guy, he gets me in the room and he's like, Wes, I need to tell you something. I would never, ever trust a 25-year-old with any financial decisions to help me with and never hire them. And he stopped talking. And I was like, am I supposed to quit? Is this what is this supposed to mean? And then he had, after a long, unnecessary, by the way, pause, I still bring this up to him today. He said, except you. He said, because I've heard your heart. He says, Wes, you got some really good ideas. You've got a lot of bad ones too, though. So we got to flesh those out. He said, but I just sold a business, one of my businesses, and I've got a bunch of decisions I need to make over this next year. And I'd love for you to help me. And so we did. And out that year, the work we would end up doing, it wasn't overnight. This wasn't microwave. It was a crock pot. We ended up paying back that line of credit because the work we would do would generate so much income for us, our piece of that. And we would be able to satisfy our pledge and add another year to it. And I often think back, what if we hadn't done that? Like, what if we hadn't said, because you say so? Today, we have clients all across the country. We have team members all across the country. That guy's still a very good client of ours all these years later. And I often think back to what if the people that started Shoreline in the 1980s, what if they didn't have their because you said so moments? My life would be inherently different, and our family's life would be. And when we moved to this part of town, I often think about how different, because our kids grew up in this church, I often think about how different our lives would be if the people that started North Point, way back when it wasn't meeting here, right? And if they didn't have those because you say so moments. And I think about all of us as we sit here today, the amazing stories that you're going to tell about the day that you had a because you say so moment, about the thing that didn't necessarily make sense because you've got a gap between where you are and where you want to be. It's not going away. It's going to move. And this thing seems so contrary to it, but I can just promise you that the unlived life he has for us is so much bigger than the unlived life we have for us. And when you have a because you say so moment, everything will ultimately change and your life will be radically better and the world will be radically better as a result. So before I pray for us and let you go, you're going to be getting a sticker on the way out of here. It says, because you say so. Put it somewhere where you're going to see it. Put it on your phone, put it on your computer, a mirror, wherever you might see it. Because I think this is one of those unique times that can be a game changer time in your life for what God wants to do next in a major way. So let me pray for us before I let you go. Father, we love you. I thank you for everybody here today and everybody watching online. Lord, I thank you that all the weight that goes into a conversation like this, I thank you, Lord, that you invite us to get to do life with you, and we don't need to be afraid, that you have got so much for us. You've got a great plan and purpose for our lives, Father, and you're inviting us into this journey with you. So, Father, as people leave here today, I pray you just give them a special touch and you would show up in such a unique way in their life with things they're struggling with, Lord, with things that they're scared to do, that you would just show how big you are in all of our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you guys. Have a great rest of your Sunday.
We really hope you enjoyed that and found that not only inspirational, but impactful to the story that you find yourself in. Till next time, thank you for listening.